Orale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. This is your host, Jorge Martin. Familia NFL Insider Series is caliente. It is happening. It is happening. We got, oh gosh, I'm just so pumped. This is, this, I love doing this year round. But then reconnecting with these writers and these podcasters and all these people who are boots on the ground with these teams, it just makes such a big difference. So I mean, oh please, so you don't miss a second. Go subscribe on YouTube. Familia FFB on YouTube. Set those notifications up. You're going to get these. They're going to be coming up regular 4 or 5 times a week during the this time all the way through kind of when training camp begins. We're going to go all the way through. We're going to give you some of these great minds, and also want to make sure when you go to Underdog Fantasy, use that promo code Familia23. Get the first $100 that you put in, we're going to match you the next $100 so you could keep playing best ball. Best ball mania is going on. Multi-million-dollar tournament that's going on. There's puppies, there's poodles, there's Pomeranians that are going to be coming. So many drafts, best ball drafts. It's phenomenal. We're going to touch on it a little bit today. And it's just, if you haven't tried it, you're going to love it. I tell you, and it's great practice for when redraft season comes along later in the year. You're going to already know who's going to be there in the 5th round, all because you're on best ball. So underdogfantasy.com. And if you don't want to put it in Spanish, in English, put it in Spanish, Familia 23. You're going to match you that first $100. And Familia, I'm welcoming back another guest. I've so loved watching this man's rise in covering the Falcons. Last year he was just getting started. Now he's been covering them over a year now. I remember congratulating him when he hit that anniversary, and he tweeted me back, told me how much it meant that I had him on last year, and I'm so thrilled that he's back, because he's pretty much fresh off of mini camp right now, and he's doing so much good stuff covering the Falcons for Falcon Report, part of Sports Illustrated. Bienvenido, our amigo Daniel Flick. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you, Jorge. Dude, I'm very happy to hop back on with you. Last year was a lot of fun. I'm sure this year will be even better. I mean, we got a lot more to talk about this year. A lot more intrigue around the Falcons. I've heard they added a few offensive players that may intrigue a few people. So I'm looking forward. I appreciate the glowing intro, and I appreciate you helping me out on my personal path, and really happy to reconvene with you this time around.
No, it's awesome. I mean,
hope to keep it going. Annual tradition.
And I hope, yes, and I hope that some people, we were talking offline, I hope other people did what I did and listened to you on Tyler Algier last year, because that would have won you some money, because he was especially money during the closing weeks, the fantasy playoff weeks. So he didn't take me to a championship, but he got me to a second place finish, which still cashed in some pretty good money, and it got me some street cred with fantasy points, folks.
You know what? That's all that matters sometimes, right? I mean, hey, you brought home a check. You're raised your personal image, right? And I mean, really, as far as I'm concerned, that's a successful fantasy season, right? I mean, close enough, close-ish, positive momentum, right? It was a rebuilding year, and you know what? You're outperformed expectations. So I mean, in my personal opinion, I would chalk that up as a quality year at the office.
It's a big win. It's a big win. Considering some of the people who were in that league, it's a big win. And actually, he helped me out in a couple other leagues as well. So, definitely listening in on that. So, but you know what? Turning the page, and now we're looking at the season, and I'm not going to say he's an afterthought, but they brought in the top running back, Brett Whitefield, who's one of the main data guys, who's been charting running backs since 2015, has him as his second best running back that he's charted. His name is Bijan Robinson. Familia, I put Bijan Robinson to the moon for all our Familia who's listening on audio. I mean, the expectations are almost out of this world for him. He's going off at that, like the 8th or 9th pick a lot of times in underdog drafts. Is the expectation level too much, even considering the fact that this is a run-based offense?
I think the interesting thing about the situation with with Robinson to me is I think early in the season, you're going to see him kind of not necessarily eased into it, but I don't think you're going to see him come out of the gates week one and post his incredible stat line or, put up incredible fantasy points, instantly. I think it won't take as long as it did with Algier for him to, really produce. But I do think with Bijan, he's going to live up to the hype. I think. And again, that's, it's kind of the tricky part of post, OTAs and everything else obviously leading into the preseason and camp and everything else we still haven't seen him, in pads. But I think when you look at what he did, obviously at Texas, just, phenomenal college career, as you mentioned, perhaps the second best running back prospect in the last roughly 10 years, if I had to say, right? Like, I mean, you're talking, I'm pretty sure he was the highest drafted running back since Saquon back in 2018. There's been, I want to say Leonard Fournette in 2017 went number 4. I think some people would probably maybe argue that, but I mean, regardless of how you're going to rank them, elite running back prospect, right? So, I mean, I think with Bijan in particular, you're drafting him not only because he is obviously an elite running back. The Falcons view him as an offensive playmaker more than a running back. And, that's one thing that they've said from like his introductory press conference post-draft all the way through like last week with him is that he's more than a running back. Throughout OTAs, he's been used everywhere. I mean, you could find a number of clips, number of clips on Twitter of him catching passes and just, running out routes or running whatever. I mean, you could pull up film of his, obviously in college, of just running slot routes and like catching 35, 40-yard passes, middle of the field, just really special talent. You're obviously taking the risk because you haven't seen the pro production compared to some of the other, highly thought of fantasy running backs. And obviously that is, pretty sizable risk. But again, with Bijan, he can do so many things, and he's already probably at least the second or third best offensive player on the Falcons. And I think whether it's running the ball in, as you mentioned, a very run heavy offense, or throwing the ball when he'll be a very, reliable safety valve option for an experienced quarterback with Ridder, as you mentioned earlier. It's, I think with Bijan, I think his floor is higher than you would think for the average rookie running back. He does come with risk. Obviously, everybody does. Every rookie does. But I tend to think Bijan, if he stays healthy, is going to have a really, really big rookie year. I personally think he has a very strong chance of winning Offensive Rookie of the Year. And if I had to guess, I would say that fantasy numbers for Offensive Rookie of the Year in the past several years have been pretty good. And so I would buy all of the Bijan Robinson stock. Me personally, I would take Bijan to the moon.
Oh man. So, when we're talking about that, it's hard to put numbers on it, but if you talk about like 3 receptions a game, that puts him about 51 receptions on the season. Is that something that's doable? Because I think that really just takes him. If he gets 275 to 300 carries, you add that on, and I mean, we could be talking about like a running back 1 type of season overall.
Yeah, I think a more realistic number is probably in that 38 to 45 range. It's probably about, which is going to put him at, somewhere in between 2 to 3 catches per game. I think with Bijan, the other important part of it is that he, historically has maximized his receptions at a very high clip. At Texas, he had 805 receiving yards over 3 years, which was the, I think, 3rd highest mark in program history. Among running backs. And so, again, in 3 years he did that. And so it's not like he was this, if you put on his film at Texas, which I'm sure you've watched, all the clips that you've needed to become well acquainted with him. And I'm sure everybody else has too. Obviously he's a pretty popular name, but, he was only getting a couple of targets a game there, but it's what he did with those targets that he was really special. And I think with the Falcons, having such a plan to play him, in the slot more than what he did in college, I think there's a fair chance that his, receiving production actually increases as a professional. So again, 51-ish receptions as a rookie, probably a little rich. But it would not shock me if by, season's end, we're looking at a guy who's got like maybe 41, 42 receptions for 425 yards or something like that, or 300 and, whatever, he's going to be good. I tend to think with Bijan, a successful rookie, not successful, but like the relative view of what I'm expecting is probably about 1.2K on the ground and probably about 400-ish, 430-ish through the air is about what I would expect, somewhere in that 1,500 all-purpose yards. The Falcons really love him, and he's been really impressive so far. So I think it's high expectations for a rookie, but they drafted him at 8 for a reason. And I think there's reason to buy stock. I'll say that.
Oh, mi amigo, I'm telling you, you're giving me like, chill sweats. Kind of like almost like my head is starting to glisten a little bit, like if I just ate some really really hot salsa on tacos. So that's what I'm so pumped, so pumped. Now, now he's gonna be a huge part of this offense. Tyler Algier, who had over 1,000 yards, and Cordell Patterson, who was a big part of the offense in 2021, are they kind of afterthoughts a little bit more?
I don't think so. And so here's the thing. Now, you're probably a little bit more knowledgeable on this specific topic than I am, but Algier, up until the last 4 weeks of last year, largely hung around that 10 to 12 carry per game mark from probably like week 4 through about like week 13, week 14. And so obviously, in that time, kind of like with Robinson as a pass catcher, Algier as a runner was never really high volume until late in the year, but he was still productive. Because he's out there taking, 10, 12 carries and still rushing for 80 yards, 70 yards, whatever it might be. And with his running style, as physical as he is, he didn't really have he didn't really find the end zone that much last year. But I think with the way that he's built, it's really only a matter of time. And so I think the Falcons, again, with the way that they want to use Bijan, there's, I think, a plan more for Algier to probably be in that 10 to 15 carry per game mark. And again, wow, with this offense, this offensive line, because I don't think his role will drop from where it was, like halfway through last year when he was like the 1A, 1B type of, relationship with Patterson last year. And it should be very similar to that, just with Robinson as the 1A getting in that 15 to 18 carries, per game range. And then I think you'll see Algier, because last year they ran it about 33 times a game. That was with, more quarterback runs when they had Marcus Mariota under center. Arthur Smith has already said that with Ridder at quarterback this year, they're not going to have as many QB runs, at least not as many, called QB runs. And so, but, they want to keep that run pass, kind of at about 50-50. So, I think that's going to lead to more overall handoffs, obviously. And so if you keep Robinson about, 15 to 18, Algier's getting about, 10 to 13-ish per game, maybe touching 15. And I think Patterson, I'm sure, kind of switching over to him a little bit more. Patterson's probably, if you look back to how he was used in 2021, you mentioned how good he was that year. A lot of what's been said is that he's probably going to be back more into that type of role than what he was in last year, where he was more of a, lead runner, just because of the way the Falcons offense kind of, the way it was kind of created, and the way the pieces they had weren't really there for him to kind of play that same role. And so last year he kind of had to take on more of a lead runner role. This year it's going to be back more to 21, where he became the first player in franchise history with 500 rushing, 500 receiving yards. Like, I mean, whether he reaches those numbers, I don't think he'll get that high. I think it's more likely he's in like that, I don't know, maybe 400 kind of, range. Because again, he's another guy. The Falcons receivers room is not overly deep. And so with Patterson, he's been split out quite a bit. Obviously, very good receiving background, proven pass catcher, proven offensive weapon. And so I think with him, you'll probably see him kind of still be a guy that gets maybe 5 to 8 touches a game, more in a, kind of specific role. So he won't be like the featured player that he was like early last year. I think he was a really high volume player. And then kind of as the year went on, he kind of saw his role drop more and more. I think this year there's a chance he avoids that late season drought, just with the, other running backs the Falcons have on the roster should kind of help him, a little bit in that regard. But I think there's still optimism there that he can be, again, kind of like with Robinson and with Algier, a guy that's probably he's well suited to maximize his touches, even if he's not getting, as many touches as Robinson and Algier will get. But I do think Patterson's a guy that probably late round flyer type is where I would view him at the moment. Wouldn't really value him too terribly high, just with the way that, because I mean, he is going to enter the year as the, probably number 3 running back, probably number 4 receiving option, which should still net him, again, somewhere in that 400 range. But not the high volume type of player that he was.
And he's a guy who's going off late in drafts, and I think he is being treated as an afterthought. And after this, I'm definitely going to have to start considering him and promoting him a little bit more, because as the guy that take a flyer on, especially in best ball drafts at the end. So just to be, to have that guy in the 17th, 18th round who could be like, hey, you know what, this could be my last running back, and use him that way.
They really, that's the thing. Arthur Smith has a tremendous amount of respect for what Patterson does, for his skill set, for the way that he works, for everything. They love him. They love Cordero Patterson inside that room. They think the world of him. And, he's proven it. The last 2 years, he's been really, really good. And it's just, opportunity might not be as good this year as it's been in years past. But again, with the way that the Falcons want their offense to look, I think he's another guy that you're going to know is probably going to get 8 to 10 touches a game, and could be more, could be less, depending on flow of the game. Arthur Smith as a play caller is a very big rhythm and flow play caller. And so I think you might see some inconsistencies there with Patterson's scoring output. He's another guy. I mentioned Algier's, red zone production last year, not great. Patterson was their man. He was their guy. Like, once they got inside the 20, like Patterson took over games last year for them. I mean, like, he late in games, red zone area. I mean, he was a very, very big asset for them. And I think he's a guy that, again, this year they trust him. Late in game situations, I think the Falcons expect to be playing with the lead more this year than they have in years past. You want a guy you can trust. I think Patterson will be one of those guys that they really, really trust, and really, I would expect him to continue to be a scoring presence this year. And again, I think probably in that 5 to 10 touches per game category, which should give him a fair chance to, post fair numbers in a variety of roles. And I think you'll see him used all over the offense. And I think he's got a higher ceiling than some people maybe think. But again, the floor is definitely not, the floor is also fairly safe. It's just, I'm not, he's not going to end up being a high level producer. I don't think.
Awesome. Well, we kind of buried the lead a little bit right now, because the other most important player in this offense is going to be Desmond Ridder. And there's a lot of intrigue right now in the fantasy community. Is he really a quarterback? Is he ready to take the next step? He had a 4-game. Yeah. And actually, I think you predicted it was going to be about a 4-game. I think you predicted it was going to be about a 4-game audition last year. So
good for me. Man, I'm really doing some numbers for you here.
Yeah, you're gonna.
Definitely. I gotta come on here more often. I look like I know what I'm saying on here, man. This
exactly. So is Desmond Ridder ready to take that next step and become an NFL and prove himself to be an NFL quarterback and hold back Taylor Heineke?
Yeah, I think with Heineke in particular, you're probably they signed him. They told him, like, the second that, like, pen hit paper, like, you are the backup. And so that part, obviously they've got that completely figured out already. With Ridder, I think he is ready. To answer the question, I do think he is ready. He's kind of been a little up and down in the spring, more ups than down. But again, you're not going to see a whole lot more until pads come on. And even the preseason probably won't be as telling. You're not really going to find out about him until you're in the thick of it, right? And so that's part of it. But again, you look at last year, the Falcons were very pleased with how he progressed in his 4 games. I mean, I've called it a tryout. It's pretty much what it was. It was like, here's your slate. You've got 4 games. We're going to start you out on the road in New Orleans, then have you go play in Baltimore for the coldest home game they've had in 2 decades. Have fun. Right. And so, I mean, he set a pretty low, the Falcons kind of just threw him out there and we're like, we're going to see what you got. And he got better every week. He got better. He made some plays with his legs. He extended quite a bit. I mean, he showed quite a bit more than I think a lot of people thought. Then there were some people who kind of left that maybe wanting a little bit more. evidently the Falcons really weren't in that party. The Falcons committed to him. The Falcons, here's the thing. They have not verbally endorsed him as much as you would think, but I don't think they need to. Because if you look at the actions, you see who they've signed in free agency, how they've gone about it. You hear them talking about, playoff, Super Bowl, all these things that they haven't talked about in years past. They've got a lot of confidence. They think they're ready to win, and they chose him as their guy under center. And I think that really tells you all you need to know about where he's at, where they feel he's at. And then again, you look at the way that he's wired. I wrote something the other day, interviewed a lot of, past teammates of his, present teammates, coaches, executives, whoever it may be. People love the guy, like leadership wise, off the charts. He got all the intangibles. It's a team that is 100% behind him. There is zero doubt that he is the guy. There is zero doubt that he's ready for it in that locker room. Calais Campbell signed with the Falcons after he watched Ridder's tape, and he was sold on what he saw. He believed in what he saw on tape. And so I think, he's a guy that's 37 years old and has not won a Super Bowl. He's done everything in the NFL except win a Super Bowl. Signed a 1-year deal with Atlanta because he thinks the Falcons can win a Super Bowl. You don't sign that contract after watching that film if you're not confident in what you've got under center. And so again, we're going to find out more about him once the year kicks off. It's not a type of deal where I think anybody knows for sure, how exactly he'll perform. Fantasy relevant. It's a very run heavy offense, and if you look at his numbers last year, when he started, even his good numbers were kind of sitting in those 220 passing yards a game, and are pretty much kind of what Arthur Smith's offense is. And Arthur Smith, again, like I said earlier, has said that Ridder will not be involved in the QB run game as much as what they had last year with Mariota. And so that was a very big part. I mean, at one point last year when the entire fan base wanted Mariota bench, he was like the number 10 fantasy quarterback, just because he was really, really racking up some yards on the ground. And so I think with Ridder, you're not going to have that element. You're going to have the passing element. Red zone efficiency for him was a problem last year. I think he's firmly in prove it mode at the moment. I tend to think he would be a decent late round flyer, kind of, again, because there is some potential there. Again, I think there's reason to believe with the way that he's wired that he can take that next step and keep on progressing. Because again, they love the way he finished last year. Thought he ended on a really big upward trajectory. And so if you can kind of carry that over into 2023, there's, obviously reason for optimism that he can be a pretty solid NFL starter. Now, again, will his skill set in the Falcons offense translate to a quality fantasy quarterback? That part, again, that's where I think you're firmly in prove it mode. I don't necessarily think as of right now that I could confidently sit here and tell you that, like, yes, he will be a top 10 fantasy quarterback. I think that'd be a pleasant surprise. I don't think he's going to put up the yards passing the football. And I don't think he's going to be involved enough in the running game to really reach that point. And again, red zone efficiency last year was not a strong suit for him. And if you're the Falcons, you're going to be pretty run heavy in that part of the field anyways. I mean, they already were. And then you add in all the personnel they have now. I mean, I tend to think they're going to be a lot more run heavy in that part of the field, which means, he'll have to hit more explosives, and that's not necessarily the strongest part of his game. So again, I think to answer the broad question, I think he's ready to be a starting quarterback. Will that translate to fantasy success? Jorge, I can't commit to that much. That I can't get on that train. But I do think there's a reason that, positive reasons to, feel that he'll be a pretty good pro quarterback and have a pretty decent season where, I'm back on here next year talking about maybe he can take that jump from year 2 into year 3 and end up being a top 10 fantasy quarterback.
You mentioned one thing you mentioned earlier, that they don't expect to have as many designed runs for the quarterback this year. And, with him being before Anthony Richardson blew everything out at the combine, Desmond Ridder was, considered one of the better athletes to ever test at the combine at the quarterback position. So I definitely had a really fast 40-yard dash. But you think they're not going to turn him loose that much? I mean, not on a Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields type of level,
right?
But,
yeah. So Arthur Smith went on. I want to say it was a podcast with Chris Long last month, and was asked about like that exact question, and he was talking about that, and he's like, "We will not run Ridder as much as we ran Mariota last year." And I want to say Mariota averaged about 8 to 10 attempts per game. Now, will Ridder still get a couple rushes? Yeah, he'll get a couple scrambles in there as well. Obviously, I'm sure it's kind of just the way it goes, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure when he was in his little tryout last year, he did not really have a lot of read option plays, a lot of with Mariota, they ran quite a few of those QB speed plays, threw a couple blockers out in front of him, kind of let him just roll because he was really good at that, and I think with Ridder, you're not going to see that, to that extent. I think you're going to see a few read options here or there. I mean, you have to keep the defense honest, to an extent, obviously. And I think Ridder has enough mobility to where he can, pick up a few yards here or there. But I think I want to say that he got maybe 60 yards on the ground last year. It was a number that was not particularly high. In his 4 games, I think he averaged about 15 yards per game. And I don't really think maybe that'll go up to about 20-25, but I think he ran like a 4.49 40, but they're not gonna, football speed might not match that. And I don't think the Falcons really want to put him necessarily in harm's way as much. And I don't think it's as much of a strength for him as it was for Mariota last year. And so I think with Ridder, again, probably not the highest floored runner, and the ceiling's okay. But again, I don't really think he's going to be used to that extent with it. So I think most of his productivity is going to end up coming from the passing game. And I think you'll probably see him average about 230 yards per game, maybe a touchdown in there as well, kind of somewhere in that range. He did a very good job last year of limiting turnovers, which obviously is a very important part. But overall rushing production, I would not expect a ton.
Awesome. Oh my goodness. Well, one guy who you mentioned he had one guy he really connected with in those 4 games was Drake London, and he had kind of a good closing himself. There's so much intrigue around him and Kyle Pitts, but how much do you think there's some carryover for in that connection between the two of them for 2023?
A ton of it. To be a ton of it. They were, so if you go back even as far as like right after they got drafted, they were roommates at rookie minicamp. In the off season, they trained together in California, at least last year. That was the story, is they worked under Jordan Palmer, former NFL quarterback. They trained together with him. They grew a very close connection there. And those are 2 guys. They love each other. They are very, very close. They have a very good relationship. And you could tell last year that Ridder from the start was very comfortable, very confident throwing to London. And again, that's something, the way the Falcons offense is, you add Robinson into that group, you'd expect he'll play out wide quite a bit, as we've talked about. Same with Patterson. But beyond them, you got Kyle Pitts, obviously, is in that group. And, I'd expect him to take a pretty good step forward coming back from his injury. You add Jonnu Smith, who's supposed to be a pretty versatile, player, kind of play several roles in the offense. But I think with London behind him in the Falcons receivers room, there's not a lot of depth there. And so you got Mac Hollins, who's probably going to be, he'll probably end up as the second wideout, great leader. But, he's only really had 1 year of really, solid, I guess, offensive production, which was last year, but again, we'll see how that kind of translates over into Atlanta. Behind him, you got Scotty Miller, after that, Penny Hart, Josh Ali, a lot of guys that aren't really in the fantasy conversation. And so, I think you move on with London as clear cut, he's the go-to. And so, again, it'll be a run-heavy offense, but it's an offense that's still going to end up probably passing the ball 25, 30 times a game. Obviously, snap count will play a part of that, but they want to be about 50-50, maybe 55-45 in favor of passing the ball. And I think with London, he'll be the primary. I think he's got a lot to gain. He'll be the primary target. He's got, the way he closed last year, with Ridder, especially red zone stuff. Those windows are tight. You got to trust a guy. London not only is a very, very good 50-50 wideout. Huge frame, strong hands, everything, and really high point of football. He's reliable, and Ridder trusts him, very confident in him. And I think with London, I believe he hit 882 receiving yards last year, 862 maybe, somewhere in the 800s. He broke a franchise record in receptions for a rookie with like 72. Closed the year averaging 120 yards per game with Ridder under center, somewhere in that range. Is a very high number, very, very high number. They are very comfortable. Yeah, I mean, just very, very comfortable with one another, very confident. I mean, I tend to think that London is in for a very, very big second season. I tend to think that him hitting 1,100 yards, 1,200 yards, not out of the picture. And so I personally think, I mean, he's come back to camp, laser focused. I mean, he is ready to win. And I truly believe, players often take, like that year 1, year 2 jump is just huge, right? I mean, Arthur Smith talked about that, I think, last season, just like that's the time that a lot of players improve the most. And I think London was already really good as a rookie, and everything's kind of shaping up for him to be just, spectacular in 2023.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, you got me pumped up. So, and that one especially, that one's one that him and Jahan Dotson seem to be guys I'm keeping an eye on for very different reasons. But yeah, he's not expected to have a big, he's such a great target, and he's so much more talented than the rest of the wide receivers. I'm not putting Kyle Pitts in there because Kyle Pitts is his own position, but he's so much more talented. I could see 125 targets, 125, 130 targets, and I'd love to see what he could do with that. And that's got me pumped for him.
Yeah, and again, if you look at it, and with Ridder last year in his 4 games that were there, London's target share was huge. I mean, especially early, like the very first few games they had, target share to London was massive. Especially like week 1, that I guess it was week 15, but Ridder's first start in New Orleans. I mean, London was probably like 60% of the targets, if I had to guess. I mean, it was a huge, huge number.
Big number.
It was, and then again, the week after that, they had probably like 6, 7 completions. I mean, it was incredible. Like the way that London took over that game against the Ravens in Baltimore was very, very impressive. I mean, he made some phenomenal catches in that game. And then week after that, quieter role. And then it closes the year with like 8 catches for 125 yards. I mean, just big game. I mean, the guy closed the year with a lot of momentum. I mean, proved he could be a clear cut, top tier wideout, in my personal opinion. And just prove he's got the full package. I mean, a few people were concerned about long speed, route running, whatever it may be. I think he quieted a lot of those concerns last year. And after Ridder took over, I mean, I would tend to think that his numbers the last 4 weeks of the year, target wise, receptions wise, everything, were probably amongst the top maybe 10 to 15 wideouts in all of football in that 4-game stretch. And I really don't think there's much reason to think that his role will drop this year. And so I think, it's not like it was with Pitts last year. And you kind of think like, how's he going to, I guess, handle, you transition from Matt Ryan over to Mariota last year, and you just got 2 guys that just were never on the same page. I think Pitts had the highest like off share or off target share like anybody in football, or was like among like the top 2, top 3. Like it was just a ridiculous number. And so him and Mariota were just never on the same page. I think with London, you've got proven track record that he is really good with Ridder. The chemistry again goes far beyond that 4-game stretch, and it's been really good in camp. So I think London's stock in particular, if I were to draft a Falcons offensive player, I think London would be the one I'd feel most confident in drafting. Just I think he'll probably be a very safe fantasy wide receiver 2-ish, maybe with a floor of a 1. If he kind of, him and Ridder did not, there were no touchdowns there last year. And so that's kind of the one drawback. But again, when you think about the way that relationship works and everything, I think there's a lot of reason to believe that he can put up maybe 5, 6 scores this year and, move from there. Because again, if he's doing that, and like you said, 125 targets, I don't think it's out of the equation. I think he had about in that range last year, and I think it's, certainly possible he's in that range again, if not a little bit higher.
Fantastic. Well, let's jump over to Kyle Pitts real quick, just to kind of close up the skill group. I mean, right now people are getting a discount on him. He was going in the 3rd round of fantasy drafts last year. Now he's going in the 6th round. first off, the health factor. He did not participate in OTAs or mini camp. I mean, I know they're bringing him along slowly. Is he expected to be full board? But that's something to keep in mind when it comes to training camp starting.
Yeah, he'll be a full go. He will be a full go for training camp. Pads on, everything should be fully good to go. He's been around the team. He was not there for mandatory mini camp, as you mentioned. He was kind of still kind of working through his own little program there. But yeah, he's been around the facility, kind of, I guess routine checkups, all of that stuff. But yeah, he'll be good to go. Everyone should be, other than Avery Williams, who got hurt a few weeks ago, everybody should be pretty much ready to roll.
And how's his? I mean, and so his role, it's definitely looking like he's going to be the number 2 pass catcher in this offense. I mean, this is definitely some. The tight end when Arthur Smith was in Tennessee was definitely a focal point of the offense. Now we're looking at Kyle Pitts. I mean, with health and even with Drake London there. I mean, could we still be looking at a top 4 or 5, maybe even higher tight end?
Yeah, and I think the one thing with Kyle Pitts that a lot of people overlook is that, again, I'm pretty sure somebody put together like a 2-minute video clip of all his target, just all the the bad passes that went his way. And I think it was all of his targets from last year, or all of the ones that were considered to be bad throws. And I mean, a lot of those you can look, and he's got plenty of separation. I want to say that they missed I think Mariota overthrew him to a clip that led to about 400 missed yards last year, which throughout the full season would have put him well above 1,000 yards. Now, again, you're not going to convert those every time, but even if you convert half of those, right, you're still talking about a guy that's on pace to get 800, 900 yards, which, I mean, that's a fine year for a tight end, and again, he's
phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, he's not just a tight end, obviously. And, the way that he'll be used will be fun to watch. I do want to point out, though, that he has not actually played with Ridder yet. Obviously, he got hurt before Ridder took over. So we don't really have like a firm thing to kind of look at and say kind of how it is with London, where it's like proven production. We don't really have that with Kyle Pitts. Arthur Smith was asked about that last week, said he's fully confident that they'll pretty quickly hop on the same page. With the way that last year Ridder became very comfortable throwing to Michael Pruitt at tight end the last 4 games of the season. Kyle Pitts is, all due respect to Pruitt, I think he tied for the Falcons team lead in touchdowns last year. Kyle Pitts is a special football player. And again, I think people are kind of lower on him, as you said, just because he had the really kind of poor 2022 season production-wise. Kyle Pitts still the same player. I mean, he's still the same guy that he was last summer when you and I talked, that he probably even better. Whatever thoughts you had about his upside last year are still there now. And again, as you mentioned, Arthur Smith loves tight ends, huge fan of the position. I think Johnny Smith will have a fair role. I'm not sure it'll be enough to be fantasy relevant. As you mentioned, he was very good under Arthur Smith in Tennessee. But with Pitts, I think, again, with the way they're going to use him, it's going to be the same way that he was used last year. And I think they're just hoping that you get a target share, an on-target percentage that's, much higher than, whatever it was last year. I think with Mariota, it was like 70%, but I think off target was about 27, 30%, somewhere in that range, which was, again, like the tops in the league for off target percentage. So, I mean, a lot of those were uncompetitive throws. I mean, he did his job. I tend to think that he's going to bounce back to a pretty solid tune. I mean, he should be fully healthy, should be ready to roll. And so I think there's a lot of confidence that he'll kind of remind people why he was, so highly thought of last year.
All right, let's close out on the football talk. The offensive line definitely has been upgraded. What is it considered a better line?
Yeah. So so pretty much the only spot that they lost is left guard, which they had they had a revolving door last year. They had 4 different guys start at left guard as a result of a ton of injuries. Neither of them were particularly bad. Neither of them were particularly good. I mean, it was a type of deal where that was pretty clearly the weakest link on the offensive line. They draft Matthew Bergeron out of Syracuse, second-round pick. They traded up to draft him at number 37, 38 overall. That's a guy that if you go back, the Cowboys actually had a video post-draft where they almost drafted Matthew Bergeron in the first round. Like they were. Oh. This is he is a guy that now he played tackle in college. He played left tackle in college, right tackle as well. But I think his last 32 starts came at left tackle. So he's in for a little bit of a transition. He only played guard before the Falcons drafted him. He played guard one time in a practice at the Senior Bowl way back in January. That was entirely new for him. Everything, but. So far, they've had Matt Hennessy as the first team left guard. He was the starting center 2 years ago. Lost the job last year in camp. Played left guard a little bit last year. Was okay. I tend to think it's Matthew Bergeron's job to lose, though. And I think you go back, you read a lot of those pre-draft scouting reports. People think he was one of the most pro-ready offensive linemen. Frankly, one of the most pro-ready players in the draft. And so I was a top 40 pick. That's why he was very close to being a first-round pick. There's a lot of optimism that phenomenal pass blocker and a really athletic guy that should be a really good fit for what the Falcons want to run offensively in Arthur Smith's wide zone. And so I think with the offensive line as a whole, last year was really good. It took a big step forward from 2021 to 2022, big step forward. And I think 23, again, 4 out of the 5 are back, and the one that's not, I believe, upgraded, or at least in the long term, should have upgraded. And so I think there's a lot of reason for optimism that everything up front should be, again, as good, if not even better than it was last year.
Oh man, well, let's close it on the other side of the ball. The defense, they were pretty easy to run against last year, and it was off and on. I think it was depending on where AJ Terrell was from a health standpoint. How they were on against the pass. How did they shape up against first the run and then the pass?
A lot better. They spent, I want to say, over $200 million in free agency on improving the defense. It's a completely new look group. Up front, Onyemata, who is really good in New Orleans, came over this offseason right up the middle. Really, really good pass rusher, pretty solid run defender. On the end, they brought in Calais Campbell, as I mentioned earlier. Big presence. A lot of people, kind of see the age. I think he's 37, 38 years old, and kind of he's not the same guy. True, but he had 5.5 sacks last year, 14 quarterback hits. He would have been the Falcons' second most productive pass rusher last year. Brought in Bud Dupree from Tennessee, who, again, you look back at 2020 when he was in Pittsburgh, tore his ACL. Prior to that, he had 10.5 sacks the year before, I want to say, and was on pace to have more than that, I believe, in 2020. He said a few weeks ago that obviously he spent most of 2021 rehabbing, kind of came back, wasn't fully healthy, got hurt again, spent 2022 injured. It's that time of year where everyone's top shape of their life. With Bud Dupree, it's top shape since 2020, and it's not hard to believe, with him. And so I think there's reason to believe that he'll be pretty good on the edge. They've got quite a few young pass rushers there. Arnold Ebiketie, Ade Ogundeji, a few other guys there who are pretty, there's upside there. Ebiketie in particular, there's a lot of excitement around him, especially with some of the newer pieces added. There's a new coordinator as well, Ryan Nielsen, who came over from New Orleans. He's drawn a lot of praise, very intense individual, very passionate, very competitive. Everybody there loves him. He's drawn a lot of praise. Calais Campbell called him a great football mind and just talked about how he's even taught him things that he honestly has never heard. And he's, again, a 15, I think going on 16-year NFL veteran. So a lot of good stuff coming out about him. Second level, they signed Caden Ellis from New Orleans. He had 7.5 sacks last year. Should be a pretty solid athletic player up the middle. Troy Anderson's back. He was a second-round pick last year. The run defense at the second level is probably going to be the weakest point, if I had to guess. Those guys are athletic. Caden Ellis, again, more productive as a pass rusher and blitzer than as a run defender. But I do think that should be a solid unit, probably improved from where they were last year. Got a lot thicker bodies there this year, which is obviously quite important. Then obviously, secondary, they signed Jesse Bates from Cincinnati, which I think was a huge addition. All pro in 2020, at least 3 interceptions in 4 of his 5 years, rangy player, instinctual. A side effect to that, Richie Grant, who played free safety last year, will play strong safety more this year. You talk about run defense. I mean, you put Richie Grant in the box, guy's really good, really physical, can really hit people, can really cover as well. So it's kind of a 2-in-1 there. And so I think, you look at corner, AJ Terrell's back. He kind of had a rough 2022 that flew under the radar in some ways. He was better to end the year, but numerically, he kind of had a rough go after being all pro the year before. I think they traded for Okuda from the Lions. He's been a pretty safe number 2 corner so far. I think he's going to be I think he'll be pretty solid. I think you look at the way that he's built, the energy that he's brought, very competitive individual as well. I think with him, he, again, kind of like Dupree, hasn't really been healthy. Rookie year ended after 10 games. Second year ended after like 10 snaps. I mean, really, it's his third year was last year, which he's talked at length. Like that was pretty much his rookie year was last year, and he was the Lions' number 1 corner. I mean, there were a few metrics where he was pretty comparable to AJ Terrell. So I mean, you've got 2 of the 3 highest drafted corners now, and from the 2020 NFL draft, which is obviously, an added benefit. They couldn't pick up Okuda's 5th-year option, so he's going to be entering a contract year with a full year under his belt for the first time. I tend to think that's going to, be a pretty favorable thing for him. Collectively as a unit, this is a Falcons defense that has higher hopes than it has in, frankly, probably 5-6 years. I think it's a unit that's got a lot better, a lot more experienced, and is also a lot more expensive. But again, when that comes with the first 2 parts of that story, it's fine. And so they've added guys. When you spend money, obviously you're trying to make sure you can maximize that. Obviously that's just what it is. But with them, I think they feel very confident that they know what they're getting because they signed so many proven impact players. And especially already they've seen, leadership come out like early, full force. Everything has just been, I think, exactly, what they expect it to be. Arthur Smith talked about that a few days ago about how like they've been fully pleased with everything that they've gotten, whether it's Campbell, Onyemata, Okuda, everybody that they've got, that they've added has really lived up to expectations for what they wanted off the field. And on the field, they already felt very, confident in the product that they were bringing in. So I think really they've had 39 sacks combined in the last 2 years, which is last in the NFL by a huge margin. I think they're 23 sacks shy of the team that's in second to last. Not even first, like literally second to last is 23 ahead of them, which is just a mind-boggling stat to me that I have to check every time that I type it. But I mean, they've completely reconfigured that entire unit, and I mean, there's a lot of optimism from the staff on down throughout the whole players. I mean, it's an exciting group, a proven group, a player-led group, and I think they've got all the ingredients to be a top 10, top 15 unit. And frankly, a lot of people have this perception about Atlanta's defense from years past, rightfully so, that it's not very good. Maybe not, I maybe wouldn't draft it, but I definitely think early it's a unit to watch because I think there's a lot working there, especially, even week 1, you're facing a rookie quarterback in Atlanta, very experienced unit. I think that's something to watch. So, it's going to be fun to watch that play out.
That's actually an early recommendation for DFS Familia. Early recommendation. Keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on that week 1 defense because they're probably going to be cheap. So that's gonna be a good thing. Oh, Daniel, this is awesome. So we you and I talked a little bit offline before. You mentioned carne asada becoming a staple in your diet now.
Oh yeah. It's central point. I mean, it is a complete staple, as you mentioned. Yeah, I mean, it's a weekly thing at this point. I love it. One of my favorite parts of the week is just, placing that order and having them say like, oh, this guy again, same thing. It's like, yeah, same deal.
Well, I'm going to give you 3 things to try. Three new meats to try.
I've got my notes.
Carnitas is one. And I'll
All
send
right.
this to you in a DM. So I'll
Okay.
send it to you in a DM.
Okay.
Carnitas is one. Al pastor is number two.
Got you.
Uh, and number three is birria. So I'll send these to you in a DM.
It sounds
Uh,
good. It all
it's
sounds good.
and actually al pastor and birria, you don't even need to add any salsa to it because it's
Mm.
already there's marinade in it and it's just so try those out. Oh my goodness, mi amigo, thank you for doing this. Thank you so much. I mean, so much intrigue about this team, and I love the fact that it's such a narrowly focused that the opportunities, the touches, the targets are really going to be focused on certain players. So let's see. So close up shop. Let's point everybody to what's coming up.
Yeah. So pretty much you can find me on Twitter at DFlickDraft. I post all the articles that I write that I think are worthy of reading, which again, selfishly, I think are a fair amount of what I do. There's always, I have been known to write quality things from time to time.
Yes.
I've been told. So, si.com/Falcons or si.com/NFL/Falcons. All my stuff will be there. Again, Twitter at DFlickDraft, and again, hopefully hopping on this podcast again next year. So if you don't want to see my face again for another year, I'd be fine to hop back on again sometime soon. But I think you've got about 31 other people to interview first, and perhaps I'll work my way back into the rotation. But in the meantime, I guess I'll reserve my seat for next year, and then hopefully I can, hit on a couple other heaters like I did last year. So, but no, I had a lot of fun, Jorge, as always, and happy to hop back on whenever, man.
Oh, gracias, maybe. Well, you know what? I may have to tap into your brain when it comes to post combine, so that kind of thing, because I know you were boots on the ground for that. So, I think we might have to go at least twice a year on this thing. So, thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. You know what? If they all come with top tier food recommendations, I'll join like 5 times a week if I have to. I will. I've got some calories to add to the diet, man. I'm always up for more.
Awesome, brother. Oh, gracias, mi hermano. This is awesome. Thank you again for doing this. And familia, make sure one more time, checking us out on YouTube. Give us that like and subscribe. We keep adding people, and it's been phenomenal. And also, when you go to Underdog Fantasy, make sure to use that Familia 23 promo code. Can match you up to those first $100. Beyond YouTube, if you want to listen to us on audio, thank you to Spotify for podcasters for putting us on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you get your audio podcasts. And again, also go to familiaffb.com. We got content coming out there because this is the height of the season. This is when you guys are all coming back. So one more time, Daniel, muchas gracias. Daniel, muchas gracias. And everybody, thank you for joining us. And remember, todos somos familia. Salud.